Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Ecosystems Tech. My name is Maria Yulia, and I am a Chief of Staff here at Ecomap. We have Nancy Keeler here with us, who is Principal of Allium Development Group. Through Allium, Nancy has partnered with organizations, businesses, developers, and local governments to create better communities for people and for businesses. She has supported the strategic creation of 2 ecosystems in Pennsylvania, from blank canvas through strategic planning to launch. Her years of experience in the ecosystem building world give Nancy a unique perspective on best practices, lessons learned, and practical steps for building a functioning and sustainable small business ecosystem. Today, she's going to be talking through building a healthy small business ecosystem and the key components and strategies with that. So Nancy, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll pass it to you to get started.
Maria, thank you for having me. Thank you to Ecomap for including me in this series. I saw some of the past episodes and it was great to just hear this conversation happening. And so I'm happy to provide some insight and expertise from my work around this. Like Maria just said, so Allium partners with organizations, businesses, developers, and local governments to create better communities for people and for businesses. It's a vision of increased quality of life through place-based initiatives and placemaking. And so my ecosystem work falls into that as we think about ecosystems that are really place-based and increasing the vibrancy of a community through increasing the viability of small businesses. Just to tell you a little bit more about Allium. Allium does 3 types of projects typically, which is placemaking, identifying and intentionally enhancing physical spaces within a community, place-based, working within a defined geographic boundary to build and improve collective impact, and quality of life, strategically improving the quality of life across an entire group or community. Those are the kinds of projects that we do. I was very fortunate that a few years ago, I was approached by the community that I live in, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, around building and thinking through what an ecosystem could look like for our community. And then later, working in Berks County, also in Pennsylvania, to do something similar. When I think about ecosystems, what I see is a local small business ecosystem is brought to life by the relationships between people and organizations with the common purpose of improving economic outcomes for local small businesses. So when I think around ecosystems, a lot of times I'm thinking about collaboration. What does it look like to collaborate with an outcome of improving economic development? And when I was initially approached about building the ecosystem in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, what happens is, let me back up here. There's a little delay when I'm hitting the slides. And when I was initially approached around the ecosystem in Lancaster, they said, hey, you know, these organizations got together and said, hey, can you map our ecosystem? And this was back in 2017. And it was sort of like, what are you talking about? What does this even mean? What are we mapping to what purpose? What are the category of things that exist in the ecosystem? And so back in 2017, I did a lot of legwork to kind of figure out, what does an ecosystem look like? And how are we supporting these small businesses? How do we organize these things? And so we started what in 2017, what is happening in a lot of communities now, which is really this loose coalition of organizations who are really thinking about how to support small businesses within the community. And when we came into COVID within Lancaster County, there was a framework for communication. There was a way for organizations to talk to each other, to collaborate, and think about building up the small business community. And because we had that framework, we were able to, within a week of our governor shutting down many of the local businesses, to turn around and provide resources and have open communications with the entire small business community. And that really solidified the value of this ecosystem work for organizations who maybe didn't understand before. Suddenly it made sense that, you know, we do need a platform and a reason why we're all communicating with each other, and how can we do this better? And so at that time, the Lancaster County, the organizations there approached me again and said, can you come up with a strategic plan for us? What does a strategic plan look like? And so what we're going to talk about today is a lot of the work that I did back in 2022 to figure out, what does a healthy small business ecosystem look like? What are the strategies? What are the components within that ecosystem, so that we can make decisions to drive our ecosystem to that as an end goal, right? This is, we see what we're doing here. This is where we want to go. And now we're going to make sense of it with these different pieces and prioritize which of these pieces that we should be doing. At the same time, I was approached by Berks County to do something similar. And so what was really interesting for me is building out two strategies for two different places and saying, okay, y'all, here are the things that we should be doing. Now, what works in this place? What are the things that might be naturally occurring that you already have a strength within your community? And what are things that are lacking and need to be built up? And so we're going to create mechanisms and strategies to get there. So as we look at an ecosystem, there really are these key components and then strategies. So the key components are things that are can be naturally occurring within a collaborative model and within a community. And these are things that if they're not occurring, you should be thinking about how to get them to occur. And they can occur through the strategies. So the strategies, should be implemented based on the needs of the community and to strengthen the outcomes that you want to have. So let's dive in, so it makes a little bit more sense as we're going through it. When I think about the components within a community, oftentimes I think of them as being things that are somewhat intangible, that you know if they exist within the community. Oh, before we start talking about that, I do want to show you this. So when I was doing the research back in 2022, went and had a lot of conversations with the different business support organizations within both of the communities and talked to other places, you know, other communities to see what they were doing. But these are some of the sources that I used and that you'll see referenced throughout this presentation. These are some of the papers that I extrapolated themes from based on the conversations and then the papers and everything to say, okay, multiple organizations and communities are thinking this is a good idea. So let's put this in here as a strategy or as a component. So it's not just my best guess, but this is what is kind of welling up as the collective good ideas around building ecosystems. So you'll have this on hand if you want to go and read any of these papers. I'm sure since, you know, in the past 2 years, so much work is being done, more and more is coming out, and the body of research is just growing, which is wonderful to see. So when we think about the key components for a healthy ecosystem, I see 5 different key components that you should really be thinking about. How does this exist in my community? And there are ways to assess this that I did in both Berks and in Lancaster, but we're just hitting the high level as far as what the items are that we should be thinking about. So the first item is trust, and that's a willingness to partner with, refer to, advocate for, and defer to organizations and entrepreneurs in the ecosystem. Some communities have a high level of trust across BSOs, and they're willing to talk to each other and to share information. In other communities, that is not the case. There's a sense of competition there, and often they are competing for funds. Depending on the size of the community and how many of these BSOs exist there, the culture of the place, whether, you know, when I'm in North Carolina, the culture here is completely different than the culture in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I live and work. And so when you think about how the organizations trust each other, if they don't trust, then as you're building out a framework and a structure for your ecosystem, you have to make up for that fact to make sure that there's checks and balances so that everyone feels really good about the way that the ecosystem is functioning and that they have a voice in it and that they can trust that the partners are going to treat them well. Nurturing. Creating an environment for success, walking with entrepreneurs on their journey to success, and knowing when to step in and when to step back. A nurturing ecosystem is one where you're allowing and supporting businesses to succeed, but you're not necessarily supporting businesses who are destined to fail. And you understand the difference in that. Oftentimes, there's a desire to kind of over program, to provide an abundance of programming and to provide an abundance of subsidies to small businesses just to get them started. Sometimes that is needed. Sometimes it's not needed. But in our desire to be so nurturing to a community, we can really maybe provide too much nurture to some businesses and totally leave out other businesses, or we can help people start businesses that just were never destined to succeed. And so a nurturing ecosystem is one where the organizations really understand what their personal capacity is so that they're not getting overwhelmed by helping everybody to the nth degree, but are also creating an environment of success and of access to the businesses that exist there. In Berks County, it was very interesting because I would say Berks County is an overly nurturing community. And so when I started working with them, that was something that we realized is that many of the organizations were spending way too much time with the entrepreneurs, that they didn't have capacity to do a lot, to work with a lot of organizations because they were spending all their time with just a handful of organizations. And so it's that, when we looked at that as a problem, to say it's great that you're nurturing and that you care, but how can we spread the love to more businesses so that there's more opportunity for them to succeed? So you can have these components at different levels, and it's really just finding the right level. Most of them you kind of want to maximize on. Nurturing is an interesting one because you want to just hit it at the right spot to make sure that you're helping businesses succeed. Collaboration. I think of ecosystem work as really collaboration, that you're figuring out how to collaborate well with other organizations. And what makes it interesting is that all of the organizations have autonomy. And so they have to continue to have autonomy as they're collaborating with each other. Nobody's in charge of another organization. And so how do you get organizations to shift their focus and say, we want to collaborate well, that we see that our part in the ecosystem is important to the whole, and that we need to do our part really well, and that we can partner with others to do that. So what I have here is working together to expand the capacity of partners to achieve common goals and recognizing other people and other organizations' expertise. Often, many BSOs see a gap in the market, and instead of looking to see if somebody else is already doing it, they think, oh, I'll just fill that with programming. We can fill that with programming ourselves, versus looking at all the organizations and saying, you know what, actually, this organization, this is closer to their wheelhouse and they can do it well. It's going to take less capacity for them to do more of that than it does for us. And so having a broad understanding of all of the things that exist in the ecosystem so that people are doing what they do well and expanding and deepening their expertise. Many communities, BSOs are just very surface level, that they're providing a lot of services with not a lot of depth of expertise. And so as organizations begin to partner with each other well and have a structure and an understanding of how they're collaborating with each other, they can deepen their expertise, deepen their understanding of what they do well and what other organizations do, so that they're referring people to other organizations. The other organizations are referring businesses to them, and everyone is able to expand their capacity because they're doing the things that they know how to do, that they have systems and programs and process for. I have a delay. The slides, I feel like, are giving me a little bit of a delay, so I apologize for that. So we have two more components here for a healthy ecosystem. The first is creativity. It is very important that communities be creative to the culture in their own place. So oftentimes we just want to copy and paste what somebody else is doing and say, we will be successful if we do this, build a ballpark, have a convention center, create an outdoor walking mall. I mean, how many economic development strategies have there been over the years? And yes, that can be successful in some communities, but oftentimes creatively thinking through solutions for your own community can be so much more valuable. It takes more work, but it's going to really address the needs within your community. I find with the creativity that really having funders who are willing to think outside of the box and are willing to go with you on your creative journey is the key component to having success, because you might have really great ideas that can solve things, but if you can't find somebody to pay for it, then it's not going to get off the ground. And finally, buy-in. And I know this is something that's talked about a lot, and this really is basically the fundamental starting point of building an ecosystem, is having a commitment from the organizations, the business support organizations, to be at the table and to collaborate and talk to each other and be creative and trust each other. But just having that buy-in to say, this is important, that this will improve the local economy, that we will have better outcomes because of this. And buy-in in a small business ecosystem, there's some parts of that buy-in that are fairly similar across communities. I mean, at the end of the day, what is it you want to do? You want to improve your local economy, right? So it's economic development at its base. That's the buy-in. But many organizations need a little bit more to understand why they specifically are at the table and why this specifically is making their life a little bit easier and is good for their strategic plan and for their objectives that they have in their organization. So here we have, these are the components of what it looks like to have a healthy ecosystem. Now let's talk about some of the strategies. And I'm going to be honest, there's not a clear line. I was thinking about this before. I was, oh, wouldn't it be great if we just had a clear line to say, here's a component and here's the strategy to achieve it. And it's not out of realms, but when I was doing this research, this is kind of what it shook out to be, that it was like, these are the best practices. These are the things that you should be doing. And there isn't a clear line, but you can create it through the nuance and through the strategy, which should exist within your own community. So now we're going to move forward, I believe, to strategies. There we go. And it did work. Perfect. All right, so the first strategy we have here, and I have some in green, you'll see the kind of the headline strategy, and then we're going to talk about a couple of bullet points within that. The first strategy within a healthy ecosystem is communication. It's doing communication well, and that happens in a couple of different ways. First of all, you need consistent participation by the organizations, the business support organizations in the ecosystem. It's participation that lasts over the course of years and may vary with intensity based on activities. Not everybody has time to do it to the max all the time, but there needs to be a commitment over a long period of time by organizations to be in the ecosystem, to be within this structure of collaboration. And participation should not be dependent on one staff member's buy-in, but is valuable to the entire organization. When we talk about consistent participation in an ecosystem, typically you need either executive or board level permission or engagement to say, our organization is going to be involved in this ecosystem. If you just have a staff member who is saying, this is great, this is a passion project of mine, as soon as they transition to another organization, you have just lost an entire partner. And that is not a healthy way for an ecosystem to exist. When you look at ecosystems and business support organizations in particular, there is kind of a hierarchy of the different organizations. And it's harsh to say that some organizations are more important to the ecosystem than others, but there are those organizations who provide key functions to the ecosystem. And typically they are the organizations who are receiving state and federal funding to support small businesses. And they're the ones that need to be at the table and need to really have their top executives saying, we will participate in this. This is important to us. And we're here for the long haul, which means that when staff turnover happens, the executive, you go back to the executive and you say, okay, who's our person now? That person left. Who's going to be our person now that's going to be engaged in this ecosystem work? Recurring and open communication. So this is different. This isn't just the long haul. This is organizations sharing ideas, plans, that organizations talk to each other. on a regular basis. And the communication allows partner organizations to adapt and develop without overlapping and competing with each other. Recurring and open communication builds trust within organizations, that you're really building trust across partners by talking to each other regularly. And what I have found in my work is that a lot of times when people are regularly coming to the table and talking about their programming and talking about ideas, that with time and as they build rapport with the individuals in the room, so not just with the organizations, but with the individuals in the room, they're much more willing to share and say, hey, we have this idea for doing many videos where we're going to answer entrepreneurs' questions. And I'm sitting here realizing maybe you guys should be on these videos too. Or you just have this like bubbling of ideas of ways that, yeah, maybe I would have done that on my own, but now I'm in the room with you and I realize that it would be good for you to be included in this as well, that we can showcase each other, that we can really build strength and capacity here. And that only happens when people are really networking and talking to each other. It's been great to see in Berks and in Lancaster, just to see the rapport that has built across organizations over the past few years. And it's taken years to do that. And to see the organizations who maybe were kind of outside of the fold being brought in. And because now the individual who represents that organization is at the table, there's a lot of conversation happening and they're able to more deeply engage, bring ideas, and really help drive the programming and the decisions that are being made in their own organization because they are knowledgeable of what everybody else is doing. This is communication continued. Finally, so those are kind of your open communication between the organizations. Now we need to have accessible resources. We need businesses to easily navigate and identify who is the best resource. And a lot of times, one of the best practices for this is having a common terminology across partners, an easy navigable point of access for information, and then organizational staff who are knowledgeable of other partners. So we want businesses to, as easily as possible, have their questions answered and understand who they should talk to. As a small business owner, it is so frustrating to have to look for answers. And there's so much that small business owners are trying to do all the time. And so they really just need to get from point A to point B. They do not need to talk to half of the organizations in town to get there. So when we have organizations who understand what other organizations do, we can easily get them over. When you have a website like EcoMaps provides, where people can go to the website and they can just find the information and go talk to a real person. We don't need to evangelize our own resources or anything like that if it's not what they need. We just want to help businesses get from a question to an answer, and hopefully an answer that's coming from a real person that lives within the community that can then identify if there are other questions or other answers that the business needs. So that is communication as a strategy. Now we're going to talk about goal setting and achieving. One of the valuable things about building an ecosystem and building a structured ecosystem and having a reason why organizations and businesses are getting together is that you can change the trajectory of your local economy, that you can shift the huge boat, that you can turn the boat by working collectively to go to a different destination that might not have happened before. And that happens through setting goals and achieving and working towards those goals. And so common goals, I think, is one of the most valuable outcomes of building a structure for your ecosystem, for the work of the BSOs within your community. And this is where partners have a unified vision for the local startup ecosystem, and policies and strategic plans are aligned across organizations and municipalities. That is powerful right there. If you can have people talking to each other, collaborating with each other, and then getting a vision for what the community should look like. And now each of these different organizations, with time, because they have rapport, they understand each other, they trust each other, they're going to start shifting and they come up, oh, we're doing our strategic plan. You know what? there's part of this ecosystem work over here that we could incorporate into our strategic plan. Let's align our goals. Do we want this community to grow a tech industry? Do we want to transition high schoolers into great employees and maybe even entrepreneurs within our community? What are our big goals for our community that we can then implement through all of the organizations? And so this is peak ecosystem in my view. This is it. This is what you're getting to, is that all of the organizations are working together collaboratively to make a huge change that no one could do on their own. We're talking about systemic changes. And when all the organizations are working together, the municipalities, the state agencies, they will jump in and they will help you do that work. But you have to have that foundation to say, we are a group of organizations and we know what we're doing. And we have a plan. Can you help us? That is amazing to me, is when I talk to state agencies and county commissioners and other people, and they want to know, what are the experts saying? What are the people, the experts within the community, the BSOs saying? We will support that, but we just need to have a goal, or to have, a plan. Get a little excited about that. Okay, so now we have working together. So you're going to have these really big goals, but the reality is not everything that the ecosystem should be doing needs to be done by everyone. And so pods of organizations and businesses can work together to achieve specific strategic common goals. So if the goal is to grow the tech industry within your community, not every financial institution or other type, there's so many organizations that maybe that's not really their wheelhouse. They can promote it and encourage it. They don't need to be deeply engaged in that work. And it probably doesn't even make sense, because it's hard to get a huge group of people to do something anyway. But let's get a few of the tech-focused organizations together to really think about this problem, find a way to solve it, find some solutions that they think are workable within the community, and then bring it back to the larger group. And so this is something that I love to see in a structured ecosystem, is pods of organizations thinking about it. Typically, you're going to want to have anyone who provides programming to small businesses to work as a subcommittee of kind of this larger ecosystem, to make sure if you're providing, starting your business 101 classes, patients that are doing that, they should be talking to each other. All of the financial institutions, they should be talking to each other, thinking about, do we have missed opportunities of types of funding that need to exist in this community? What are the other things that the finance guys love talking to each other. Like, they get in the room and they've all talked to the same businesses. They have a whole thing. So you have the different pods of organizations, and then you have this broader framework of, here are the big goals that we're working towards. Here's the big work of this community. So how do we that we want to do unless we measure and track it? And measure and track what is going to allow funders to come in and to help us work by saying, we're thinking about where we want this community to go, and we're going to be tracking it, and we can make sure that that happens. Measurement tracking is mechanisms for tracking and collecting data and that are in place to see if common strategic goals are being met and if offerings align with the needs of the community. So when you're doing measurement and tracking, there's kind of two things that you want to be doing. You want to be looking at the overall economic development trends of your community to see, are we actually changing the economy here? And then you also want to make sure, who we are serving, does that make sense to who actually lives here, right? Are the demographics of this community actually being served? And then the other piece of it is measuring and tracking and talking to the businesses to make sure that the services that you're providing are the services that the business community needs. Sometimes there is some nuance between the two of these. There is having people who really understand data and can develop and figure out what the right data sets are is very important for this. It is an entire, a skill set. And it is something that oftentimes the people who are developing, questionnaires for businesses or whatever may or may not actually be asking the right expert or asking the right questions to get that data back. So measurement and tracking, in my mind, is one of the most complicated parts of the ecosystem, but also incredibly crucial to the future success of the ecosystem. Okay, now let's talk about expertise, because you have to actually be an expert within your community. And there are many organizations and people providing programming that doesn't always hit the mark. And so it is important within an ecosystem as a strategy that you really do need to have expertise. So, and this comes in a couple of different ways. First of all, specialization. Business support organizations are specialized and have widely known and specific expertise and offerings. Offerings meet the needs of local entrepreneurs. That goes back to measurement and tracking, where we're talking to businesses, we're finding out what they need. Then we are specializing to give them a depth of resources. And because we know, and so the next one is coordination of programming. Business support organizations identify gaps and redundancies in programmings and work to fill and reduce them. So we are coordinating with the other organizations to understand what they're doing. And then as we are identifying what is our wheelhouse, we are deepening our expertise. We're specializing in what we do so that we're known for doing this and that we do it very well. And through that coordination, we're also identifying and kind of finding the other people who need to be doing other things and helping identify it more broadly for the ecosystem. And if there's huge gaps, then we're really going and looking at state funding and outside organizations and entities who can come in and can fill those gaps if our organization is not really the right one to be doing that. And finally, we have, for expertise, we have excellence, that business support organizations, community of practice seeks excellence. You can do things, but it needs to be done well. And there needs to be a driver and strategies to make sure that the community is always going for best practices, is always moving forward with ideas and thinking creatively around how to do things. You can have business support organizations, you can have all of the things, but if the mindset of those who are providing the services is stuck in the dark ages, is not really looking for economic success for the community, is kind of just looking to make it maybe slightly better than it is now, then the ecosystem is still going to fall short. And so having the drivers within the ecosystem to say, no, we want to do better, we want to move towards excellence, is incredibly important in moving the ecosystem and the community forward. Finally, the final thing, which is the only sort of programmatic piece of the ecosystem that is an essential strategy, is capital. Access to capital. Access to financial tools is streamlined, transparent, equitable, and available to entrepreneurs. It's interesting, as we were building out these different ecosystems and thinking about how to talk about the resources that exist, when I first did it, it was kind of like, oh, okay, we have our marketing and we have our business plans and we have our HR, and then there's funding. But the more that you work in the small business world, all of that programming is really one piece and capital is another piece. Money is what is essential to small businesses' success. And so helping businesses understand how to operate well, how to access the money that they need, how to navigate the tax credits and grants and all of the different financial tools that are very specific to your community, is, for many businesses, as important as everything else that you're doing. And so really thinking about capital and even setting it aside when you're communicating the resources that exist within your community, I have found to be very important. That it is something, you know, if you're doing a heat map on your website and you have all your resources and you have your capital, everybody's going to capital. They're going to go look at that. And so it needs to be streamlined. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be equitable. And when you think about those components, that's a lot of, you know, what is the language that we're using? Are we setting clear expectations? This goes back to the organizations. If you're a CDFI, what does your website look like? Does it make sense to a small business owner when they get on there that they can figure out what it is that you offer, that the language makes sense, that the process is going to feel fair to them from start to end, and that they don't have to have an MBA to do that, you know? And so that really needs to be thought about more broadly across the entire ecosystem, because funding is not just from banks, it's not just from CDFIs, it's also from local governments, and and from venture capital and from all these other places. And every single place has different ways that it wants to provide that funding. So creating clarity for a small business owner who's never dealt with any of these things, or has maybe only dealt with it in certain more traditional ways, is going to help businesses succeed and not be taken advantage of as well. I am going to pause for a second here. If anybody has any questions about what we've talked about, I do have something else that I can add if we have more time, but I think I've covered a lot so far.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This has been super, super great, super concise, and really hits on, you know, all the points of ecosystem building and the components and strategies there. I'd love to dive into a couple questions on my end first, if that's okay.
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. So as you know, ecosystems are often like changing. There's often multiple players working on the same thing, and they're often working on similar efforts. How is setting direction, in your opinion, something that's valuable and important, especially for smaller ecosystems, towards maximizing the similar efforts that are happening rather than working in silos?
Yes, silos, and just it's sort of a sense of distrust across organizations. Often silos are happening either because people are overwhelmed and they don't have time to engage with others, or it's because they distrust others and they think, oh, you know, if I go work with them, they might take my idea or take credit for my idea or something like that. So what I have done in Lancaster and in Berks is we have structured the ecosystem, that we have said, okay, here is a very specific way. This is a table, a physical table that we're all going to come around, right? And then there are certain categories of what organizations do. And this was when I was doing my first ecosystem map. That was probably one of the hardest things, was to figure out, like, what are the categories of things that business support organizations do? There are very similar types of business support organizations. And when you figure out what those categories are, what you're going to do is you're going to have a physical table and you're going to ask everybody, hey, once a month, once a quarter, let's all physically be in the same room together. And then maybe once a month or once a quarter, everybody who works in this set common area is going to get together and talk to each other. And that's how you break down silos, is that you provide an opportunity for people to be together physically in the same space and to then talk about what they're doing. Because many people are willing to share about their projects, but often they don't have set time to do it, or maybe they haven't been invited or asked to do it. And there's, you know, we could go into a whole segment, we have a whole webinar around kind of building and structuring an ecosystem and what that looks like and who should be in leadership. But it is, when you have a map, like having the map is one very, very crucial part of it. On the back end of the map is creating a structure and a platform for organizations to collaborate with each other intentionally and in a recurring fashion, so that they have that open communication and can build trust with each other, so that you don't have redundancy in programs. And you have certain people, when you look at kind of network theory and things like that, you have people who are going to have a tendency to know a lot of people and to kind of know what's going on. And so the more that you can get people who have that personality type, or organizations that have that personality type, engaged, and they hear tidbits from different organizations to say, oh, you're working on a BIPOC loan fund. Interesting. Actually, I heard someone else is also doing that. You guys should talk to each other about this. We had that in Lancaster when COVID happened. I was playing that role for the community. And so I talked to Community First Fund, a CDFI, and they said, we're thinking about doing a loan fund for businesses. And this is before any state or federal funding was happening. And then I talked to the city, and the city said, you know, we have some extra funds. We're thinking about doing some grants. And then I talked to a local co-working space, and they said, we're thinking about doing some crowdsourcing so we can get some grant money to some of the businesses here in the community. And talked to another CDFI, and they said, we're thinking about, I had 4 different organizations tell me that they were doing the same thing. And so what I did is I sent an email to all of them and I said, hey guys, you're all doing the same thing. Why don't you do it together? And then we were able to have a multi-million-dollar loan fund and grant program developed that was then implemented and executed before any state or federal funding happens. And that was just a willingness to partner, a willingness to just kind of say, hey, we're all working on the same thing. Can we work together?
Yeah. And I know you kind of touched on this a bit, but how do you pause to reassess to make sure that the right people do have a seat at that table, whether that's like the physical table for you all in Pennsylvania or like the virtual metaphorical table?
Yes, yes. So in a community, there are certain organizations who should be at the table, who should definitely be there, and the business support organizations. And so this is my view in my mind. The organizations that need to be there are certainly the ones that are funded by the SBA. And that's going to be your women's business centers, SCORE, SBDCs. Then you have your CDFIs, and you have the other educational institutions and state funded organizations who are doing economic development type work. But the core feature of the core organizations in an ecosystem need to be the ones that have in their mission statement that they're serving the small business community, that they're serving the business community. And so when you pull those folks together, what happens is you have a nice group of people who are then able to send letters for funding or to the local newspaper or wherever, and all sign their names together and say, hey, we think this is important. We think this is great. And then the other organizations who provide very specific expertise start noticing, and they say, you know what, I want to be at the table. Can I join and be? So it tends to draw in, and it tends to be a place that for an ecosystem of this, a structured ecosystem of this sort to be successful, you have to leave it open to everyone. You have to say, like, anyone can be at this table and we want you. But the people who are at the core of the ecosystem really need to be those that are getting that state and federal funding, because there's less opportunity for conflict of interest from those entities. This is, and I could talk about that a lot more, but in my mind, that's why those organizations should be kind of the core organizations, and then everybody else comes in around them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit before I open it up to the audience for their questions. As you know, like tech and AI are really becoming more important in this work. And it's starting to become an integral part of pretty much every industry's day to day, especially I think in ecosystem building. Are there any trends specifically that you've started to see, especially towards your point of like reducing the number of steps for a business to get the right answer that they need?
That is a really good question. I think that there's tremendous opportunity to grow in that area. I do not think it is being leveraged at all, to the extent that it can, should, and will be. And I think that that's going to make a huge difference in the future around how resources are delivered. Even when we started the ecosystem work, what was it, 5-6 years ago? And so AI to this extent did not exist, right? It didn't, to what we have didn't exist. And but something that we had really had to define and think about is, why is this important when you can really get anything that you need online, right?
Yeah.
If I can answer any question that you have, why does it matter to have a community of practice, to have real people talking to each other? And so what I see is that when you look at a physical space and you have individuals in a physical space, the warm handshake and just the rapport that is built and the community that is built is incredibly important to helping people more easily access the things that they need. You know, you're more likely to get and I hate to say it, like you're more likely to get a loan if someone knows the loan officer and refers you to them and gets you on their radar. You're more likely to get one-on-one attention with that SBDC consultant if the loan officer refers you to it, or however it works.
Right.
But the other thing is communities have very specific needs that are unique to them. Are they a former mill town that lost their single industry and is just trying to figure out what do we do from here? Or are they a suburb of a large city and they're really a bedroom community? Like different communities have different problems that they're trying to address. And certainly AI can help with that. But I think that there's always going to be a certain human component that is needed in thinking through the strategy of a community and what it looks like specifically in that place.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for answering a few of my questions, but I'd love to open it up to the audience, to the chat, with a few minutes that we have left, if anyone has any questions. I don't see any coming in through the chat. Oh, we have one from LinkedIn. Great. This is from Tim on LinkedIn. Are there examples of good local small business ecosystems that you may share?
I think that Cultivate Lancaster, so if you just do cultivatelancaster.com, would be my number one push, because I think that they're doing it really well on a very, very small scale. One of the issues with ecosystems is sustainability, and that's something they've really been working through. Another ecosystem that I would look at is Forge North, and they're doing it at a slightly larger scale than Lancaster. Lancaster has one staff member, Forge North, I think, has two staff members. And so just kind of getting from we don't have anything happening to we have a staff or part-time staff member, that's a really big jump for an ecosystem. And those are two that I would look at and just see what they're doing, see how they're structured.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll also drop the Forge North Eco Map for those in the chat. Oh, I don't know if that went to everybody, but any other questions from anyone else? No? Great. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you so much for your time, Nancy. This has been super great and super informative. And I hope everybody got something that they could benefit out of this. So yeah, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all. And feel free to reach out if you have more questions.
Great. Thank you.